At 42, LaAndrea Johnson finally spoke the words that many people in the gospel world had been waiting for, but never thought they would actually hear. Her silence had lasted for years, and when she finally decided to speak, her truth sent shockwaves through the entire faith community. You won't believe how deep this story runs. It all started quietly, with whispers and rumors around Pastor Creflo Dollar's ministry, whispers that people in the gospel circle often ignored out of fear or respect. But LaAndrea, known for her fearless honesty and her heart that always leaned toward truth, had seen enough to make her break the silence. Let me tell you, this was not just another church scandal or gossip headline. This was something that shook the very foundation of faith and leadership. From the outside, LaAndrea's life looked like a gospel dream. She had the voice of an angel, the power to move hearts, and the talent that could fill any room with emotion. She had faced pain, she had faced struggle, but she had always turned her trials into songs of faith. Yet, behind the music, behind the performances, there was a woman watching things that didn't sit right with her spirit. For years, she stayed quiet, convincing herself that maybe she was overthinking, maybe things were not as bad as they looked. But destiny took an unexpected turn. As time went on, she started noticing a pattern, the same pattern that so many people had ignored for years. This is where it gets interesting. While the world saw Pastor Creflo Dollar as a symbol of prosperity and faith, LaAndrea began to see cracks behind the perfect image. She watched decisions being made that didn't match the words preached on Sundays. She noticed how power was being used, how influence could silence truth, and how money seemed to move faster than prayer. She didn't want to believe it at first. After all, this was a man respected worldwide, a leader many saw as untouchable. But here's the shocking part. The more she saw, the harder it became to stay silent. You see, LaAndrea had always been bold, but she also understood the cost of speaking out. The gospel industry wasn't kind to those who questioned authority. It was easier to sing than to challenge the system. Yet, something inside her began to shift. The craziest part is that it didn't happen overnight. It built slowly. Small moments, private conversations, uneasy glances during church meetings, and quiet disagreements that never reached the public. All these little things formed a picture she could no longer ignore. Many people around her warned her to let it go. They said, "Don't get involved, it's bigger than you." But LaAndrea wasn't someone who could turn away from the truth. She believed that faith without honesty was hollow. You won't believe how long she carried this burden before speaking up. Every time she tried to stay silent, she felt a heavy weight on her heart, as if God himself was pushing her to speak. And this is how it began. Not as a plan to destroy, but as a cry for clarity and accountability. As she observed more, LaAndrea started realizing that the problem wasn't just with one person. It was with the whole system built around image and power. She saw leaders more focused on status than service, on wealth more than worship. She saw people afraid to ask questions, afraid to lose their place in the circle of influence. What makes this story different is that LaAndrea wasn't just an outsider criticizing from afar. She was inside the world she was now exposing. She had seen it with her own eyes, lived it, and felt it. And then came the breaking point. It wasn't one single event, but rather a buildup of moments that finally led her to say, "Enough is enough." You won't believe how emotional that moment was for her. After years of singing about truth, she realized she had to live it too. She could no longer preach about light while watching darkness hide in plain sight. She knew her words would cause a storm. She knew some people would turn against her. But she also knew that real faith sometimes means standing alone. Her decision to speak came after deep reflection and prayer. She wasn't out to create drama or chase headlines. She wanted transparency. She wanted accountability. She wanted to bring light to places where it had been dim for too long. And this is where destiny took its turn, because once she spoke, there was no going back. People who once praised her started watching her with suspicion. Some called her brave, others called her reckless. But inside, she felt peace for the first time in years, because she had finally released the truth she'd been holding. The craziest part is that her revelation didn't just question one man's leadership, it made the entire gospel community uncomfortable. It forced people to look at what had been hidden under the surface. It wasn't just about money or fame or decisions made behind closed doors. When LaAndrea Johnson finally decided to speak, the silence that had surrounded Pastor Creflo Dollar's ministry began to crack. Her words didn't come from anger. They came from years of watching, listening, and understanding what really went on behind the public image. You won't believe what she revealed next. At first, her statement seemed simple, just a few honest words about accountability and truth. But as her interview continued, people realized that she wasn't holding anything back. She spoke with a calm tone, but every sentence carried weight, as if she had been waiting her whole life to finally say it. She described moments inside the ministry that left her troubled. She said that what people saw on stage, the charisma, the sermons, the promises, didn't always match what was happening behind the scenes. This is how it works, she said. The image of holiness becomes more important than the practice of it. Her words were sharp but sincere. They weren't spoken to destroy anyone, but to expose a truth that had been covered by fear and loyalty for far too long. But here's the shocking part. She claimed there were moments where decisions about money, power, and influence were made not for spiritual growth, but for control. According to LaAndrea, she had seen situations where ministry funds were handled in ways that didn't fully align with the message preached from the pulpit. She didn't accuse directly, but she hinted at inconsistencies that raised eyebrows even among insiders. The craziest part is that some of these moments were so subtle that only those close to the inner circle would notice them. She talked about meetings where questions were dismissed, staff who stayed silent out of fear, and people who walked away quietly when they realized their faith was being tested in ways they never imagined. You won't believe how many people later reached out to her privately, thanking her for saying what they couldn't. LaAndrea made it clear she wasn't attacking Pastor Dollar personally. She was challenging a culture that had become too comfortable with secrecy. What makes this story different is that she didn't just focus on one church or one leader. She said this pattern existed in many ministries where image had replaced authenticity. She spoke about how leaders were treated like celebrities, how questions were seen as disrespect, and how the pressure to look perfect on stage crushed honesty behind the scenes. She said it wasn't just about preaching prosperity, it was about living it in ways that sometimes blurred the line between faith and finance. As her word spread, the gospel community started to buzz. People who had once praised Creflo Dollar's teachings were now rewatching his sermons with new eyes. LaAndrea's revelations had made them question things they never dared to before. Some insiders confirmed parts of her story, whispering that they too had seen things that didn't feel right. Others quickly defended Dollar, calling her statements exaggerated or taken out of context. But this is where it gets interesting. Instead of backing down, LaAndrea stood firm. She said, if telling the truth shakes the system, then maybe the system needs to shake. Her courage created ripples across social media. You won't believe how fast her name started trending. Hashtags began appearing, some calling her a hero of truth, others accusing her of trying to tear down the church. The division was sharp, but LaAndrea didn't seem bothered. She said she expected the backlash, and that's why she took time before speaking. She wanted her message to be rooted in truth, not emotion. This isn't gossip, she said. This is about accountability. But here's the shocking part. As she continued, LaAndrea hinted that what she revealed was only a small piece of a much bigger picture. She said there were things she chose not to say publicly because they involved people still inside, the ministry, people she wanted to protect. I don't want to destroy anyone, she said softly. I just want the truth to have a voice. That one line changed everything. It made people realize that she wasn't chasing headlines. She was carrying a burden. This is how Destiny took another unexpected turn. Her truth became bigger than her music, bigger than her past struggles, bigger even than her fame. Her courage sparked conversations about integrity, not just in Creflo Dollar's ministry, but across churches everywhere. People began asking new questions about money, about power, and about how easily faith could be manipulated when no one dared to speak up. LaAndria's decision became a mirror for the entire gospel world. And as she spoke, it wasn't just her voice echoing anymore. It was the voice of countless others who had been silent for too long. After LaAndria Johnson's revelations went public, the gospel world was left spinning. It was as if a secret door had been opened, and what came rushing out could no longer be contained. You won't believe how fast everything changed. Within hours, social media exploded with reactions. Fans, gospel artists, and church members all had something to say. Some called LaAndria brave for speaking truth to power, while others accused her of crossing a line that should have never been crossed. But here's the shocking part. No one could ignore her anymore. Her words had touched something deep inside people, something that had been quietly building for years. Let me tell you, this wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. Hashtags began trending, videos of her interview were shared thousands of times, and comment sections turned into full debates. People were quoting her statements, dissecting her tone, and sharing their own experiences from ministries around the country. This is where it gets interesting. LaAndria's story became more than just about Pastor Creflo Dollar. It became a mirror reflecting the struggles and contradictions inside modern church leadership. Many people who once stayed silent about their experiences in megachurches began to speak up, saying her courage gave them the strength they didn't know they had. Fellow gospel artists also reacted, and their responses revealed just how divided the community had become. Some stood beside her publicly, saying she was only speaking what everyone already knew but was too afraid to admit. Others remained cautious, avoiding direct comment, but hinting that they understood where she was coming from. A few even defended Creflo Dollar, saying his ministry had done good for countless people and that mistakes shouldn't erase that. What makes this story different is that there was no simple right or wrong. It wasn't black and white. It was gray, complicated, and deeply human. The craziest part is that even as people argued, LaAndria refused to back down. She didn't post emotional rants or try to explain herself further. She let her original words stand as if to say, the truth doesn't need defending. Her silence after the storm only made people more curious. What else did she know? What hadn't she said? Rumors began to swirl that her statement was only the first of many voices ready to speak. Some insiders claimed that other gospel artists and ministry staff were preparing to tell their own stories that could confirm LaAndria's claims and maybe even reveal more. But here's the shocking part. While all of this was unfolding, something unexpected began happening inside churches too. Pastors across the country started addressing the issue of accountability during their sermons. They didn't name names, but their words carried weight. You could hear the discomfort in their tone, as if LaAndria's truth had forced everyone in leadership to take a hard look in the mirror. For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was a warning. And for the audience watching all this unfold, it was emotional, confusing, and fascinating all at once. Destiny took another unexpected turn when even mainstream media began covering the story. News outlets that normally didn't talk about gospel controversies started running segments about LaAndria's revelations. Journalists debated whether she was brave or reckless, while others praised her for breaking the silence in a world that often protects those in power. Her story had gone beyond gospel. It had become national. This is how one woman's voice turned into a movement that questioned how faith, fame, and money can sometimes blur into something unrecognizable. The craziest part is that even people outside the church began joining the conversation. Some saw her as a symbol of truth, while others feared she had opened a door that might be impossible to close. Meanwhile, LaAndrea remained calm. In interviews, she spoke with grace, saying she held no hatred toward Pastor Dollar, but believed in the power of truth. "If the truth divides, maybe it's because it's meant to," she said in one interview, and that single line went viral overnight. What makes this story different is that it wasn't about revenge or scandal. It was about the courage to speak when silence feels safer. The more she stayed true to her words, the more people began to see her not as a troublemaker, but as a truth teller. And even those who disagreed couldn't deny her bravery because, let's be honest, it takes more than talent to stand up against power. It takes conviction. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Insiders close to both LaAndrea and the ministry claimed that new information might soon surface, suggesting that her story was just the beginning. There were whispers that others had documents, recordings, and personal experiences that could deepen the controversy even more. This is where it got truly emotional. Church members who had been loyal followers of Pastor Dollar for years began expressing their confusion and heartbreak. Some said they still believed in his teachings, but could no longer ignore what was being said. Others broke down in tears during services, wondering how something that once brought them peace now brought them pain. It was as if faith itself was being tested. And in the middle of all that noise, LaAndrea stayed quiet. She didn't post a single statement online. No interviews, no clarifications, nothing. That silence spoke louder than words. People started saying, and maybe she said enough. Maybe she's letting the truth speak for itself now. But then something unexpected happened. Pastor Creflo Dollar finally responded, not through a press conference or interview, but from his own pulpit. His tone was calm, almost sorrowful, as he addressed the congregation. He didn't name LaAndrea directly, but everyone knew who he was talking about. He said, "The devil is busy, and sometimes the ones he uses don't even realize it." The crowd murmured, torn between support and uncertainty. He went on to defend his ministry's record, claiming that his work had always been for the glory of God, not personal gain. But the tension in the room was heavy. Even those who applauded did so with hesitation. You won't believe how quickly that sermon spread online. Clips went viral within hours, and social media split into two camps. One side cheered, saying Pastor Dollar had finally put an end to the rumors. The other side accused him of avoiding accountability. Meanwhile, LaAndrea's supporters kept her name trending, calling her the voice of truth. The entire gospel community was on edge, watching every move, every post, every sermon. And just when people thought it couldn't get any more dramatic, a shocking twist came. Someone close to both LaAndrea and Dollar hinted that there had been private communication between them. According to that insider, they had spoken in private before her public statement, and that conversation didn't go well. If that's true, it changes everything. It means LaAndrea didn't just wake up one day and decide to speak. She might have tried to handle things privately first. That single detail flipped the narrative for many people. Suddenly, the story wasn't about betrayal, it was about being ignored. Her silence after that conversation now made sense to those who had been following closely. It wasn't the silence of guilt. It was the silence of someone who had already said her piece and was done fighting to be believed. As time passed, the chaos slowly began to settle. Churches started having open discussions about leadership, transparency, and financial ethics. People who once followed blindly began asking questions, not out of rebellion, but out of growth. And though many tried to move on, the story of LaAndrea and Pastor Dollar became a lasting reminder of how fragile the balance between faith and power can be. What makes the story so powerful is that it didn't end in destruction. It ended in awakening. Both sides were forced to reflect, to heal, and to see that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, always finds a way to rise. By the end of it all, LaAndrea returned to what she loved most, music. But her songs sounded different now. They weren't just melodies, they were testimonies. Each lyric carried the weight of everything she had been through, the struggle, the backlash, the courage, and the peace she finally found. And though she never directly revisited the controversy, everyone could feel that her music spoke for her. The final twist, months later, when asked in an interview if she regretted speaking out, she simply smiled and said, "If truth costs you peace, it's still worth the price." That one sentence summed up everything, the pain, the strength, and the purpose behind it all. Because sometimes the real story isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about who was brave enough to speak when everyone else stayed silent. And that's exactly what made LaAndrea Johnson's story unforgettable. A story that shook the gospel world, but also reminded everyone that faith without truth is just noise.